Our gospel reading for today is Matthew 28, 1 through 10. After the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead to you into Galilee. There you will find him. Now I have told you." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid, yet filled with joy, and ran to tell the disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me."
Good morning. Thank you, Susie and Christy, for bringing us into this worship today. This past Friday at our Good Friday gathering, I was struck when I was reading the scriptures about Jesus' death. I've spent a lot of my formative Christian time, the first few years of my life as a Christian, was spent in evangelical churches, right, for Reformed churches, right? And these are churches that I went to that spent a lot of time thinking about the suffering and death of Jesus. And you know, in our house, like Lauren grew up Catholic, so she's familiar with the Stations of the Cross. There's 14 of them, lots. And every Sunday in a Catholic church, worship is done not under a cross, but a crucifix. So Jesus' death and suffering has been present in our lives. It's maybe even kind of central to our story, right? Now, I've heard and read these scriptures that I read on Friday, and I've considered the original Greek language at times and the historical context of Roman executions and all of that. And I went and I saw The Passion of the Christ in the theater. Right? I didn't wait for it to come out on DVD. I saw it. So, but for some reason, this past Friday, as I read from the Gospel of John, as I read chapter 18 and 19, the trial and torture and death of Jesus, it felt different than all those times. I think in the past, I've been sheltered. You know, I shelter myself by these logical conclusions that we all hold about Jesus' death, right? It had to happen, right? Jesus told the disciples like 1,000,000 times it was coming. Like, if we were listening to Jesus, it shouldn't surprise us, right? It's coming. And, you know, he does rise again. So there's a sort of a temporariness to all this, right? And it's nice to lean on that certainty. Now, these explanations I have probably are me leaning into a temptation like I talked about at the beginning of Lent, right? Being tempted in the desert by Satan to accept the death as unavoidable, maybe even reasonable. These past few weeks, I keep saying that we can't have life without death. We can't have the resurrection without the crucifixion. In some ways, that is something I needed to hear, right? And it may have opened up this uncomfortable encounter with Jesus' death. I don't know, I guess, and maybe I'm the only one, but I think I can figure it all out and I can plan it, right? And if I just do it right and I do make the right choices and do the right thing, it'll all go how it's supposed to. And I'll avoid those messy complications like crucifixion, right? And there's this level where I looked at crucifixion in the past, I saw it, like it went how it was supposed to go. What was supposed to happen, happened. There's just this disconnect with the level of chaos that is part of our universe and how it touches us. After this past year, after we lost John Fink, And Lauren and Eli and Jasper and I lost our friends, and Jasper had to go to the emergency room and get stitches, and then we hit a deer, right? And we got a puppy. It sort of had to force me to admit that sometimes it doesn't go to plan. Sometimes it just all happens, and there isn't a way to prepare or control for it, no matter how much I want it to be clear and obvious and efficient and make the right choices. That isn't how life goes. So when I read about Jesus' death on Friday, some of that logical armor I've worn in the past to explain the pain and the shock and the horror of it, right? The armor wasn't there. It feels... Jasper's telling the story of how he had to go to the emergency room and get stitches, I think. Yeah, that's good. So when I heard it feels better to tell myself, right? It was going to happen, right? When horrible things happen to a point to, it's easier to point to some bad choice that was made or whatever, right? But that rang hollow this Good Friday. I have to guess any reason or explanation for Good Friday would have rang hollow to Jesus' followers too, right? Jesus died a horrific public death. He was killed by the government and the religious leaders. It was unjust. It was the world's rejection of this new way of being, a rejection of compassion, a rejection of a new world that Jesus was trying to open up for us. One where kindness and compassion mean more than success. Goals are secondary to being kind. One where our lives are to be shared for the sake of the transformation of the world. A new way of living where efficiency is abandoned for grace. One where God's love for all people shapes us into people who strive to love and care for all around us with our words and our actions. And to help our fellow travelers live into this world that Jesus went around preaching. But just like the disciples, often we want God's kingdom to come with power and might. We want the Hollywood ending. We want Jesus, the mighty victor, over those who tried and failed to end him, right? Standing victorious with his flaming sword over Pilate. But that isn't what happens. It isn't what happens even today, 2,000 years later, not even on Easter. That isn't the actual thing we get. Not even 2,000 years ago when Jesus rose. We don't get that kind of success. I mean, we Mennonites don't accept that Christianity actually won when Constantine decided to use it to violently conquer his enemies. We think that the story of Jesus calls us into a completely different story, where our success is something that the world might not even consider desirable. That makes sense? The success that Jesus calls us to might be something the world would scorn. I mean, when Jesus dies and rises again, right, we get an earthquake, right? And the temple curtain gets torn, and 2 angels show up, and the soldiers are really scared. And we do get our teacher back to walk with us for a little while. That's the story, right? But we don't get that Hollywood ending. We don't get to stand up and show the ones who stood against us that they were wrong. Pilate still rules over Jerusalem, at least for a while, until the next war over the Holy Land happens, because it's going to happen, unfortunately. You see, when Jesus rises and he talks to Mary and the other Mary, we get a different mission than the one the world would have us follow. Of hope and compassion in the face of greed and fear and pride. We get called to tame our tongues instead of using them to defeat and humiliate others. And this resurrection of Jesus gives us strength from God that will leave us often in our history. The resurrection that Jesus gives us, it leaves us worshiping in basements and caves, hiding to follow God. We may even end up as enemies of the cultural wars as we try to be faithful. Thomas Long, in his commentary on Matthew, said this amazing thing about the resurrection. He said, before the resurrection, if someone got in the way of the world's progress, the world could just mow that person down. But now Jesus is alive. He's not confined to that time anymore. Jesus is alive, and righteousness and peace and mercy cannot be dismissed with a cross or a sword. Now, right? How do we wrestle with this? We sang a song that says, we shall not die. We're all going to die. I'm sorry to break it to you. Right? Don't hear these words wrong, that mercy and cannot be dismissed with the cross or sword. The prophets can still be mowed down the way Dr. King was struck down by a bullet. But prophets have followed Dr. King and have continued to stand and speak for justice. And through this resurrection, we are assured that as we seek the good and beautiful things of God, and we seek to share them with the world, that God will care for us, alive or dead, broken down on the side of the road, or happily arriving at your destination. Because Jesus conquered death, we need not fear it. Jesus conquered life, we need not fear life. The places where we fear, we can stand strong because of the resurrection. Because God has raised up Jesus from real, painful, horrible, unjust public death, even that has been conquered. We can step forward as we seek to connect and follow Jesus. Connect to and follow Jesus. We know that horrible things will happen, right? No matter what. But that's not the last word. We can make mistakes. We can fail. We can even die. But that isn't the end of God's story. Because Jesus has risen, and though you and I will surely stop breathing, the people and mission of God will never die. Amen.